March 3rd, 1973, Hong Kong, just before 7 in the morning. The production office for Enter the Dragon occupied a long, narrow room on the second floor of a building adjacent to Golden Harvest Studios on Hammer Hill Road, Kowloon. The room had a single window facing east, and at 7 in the morning the light that came through it was the particular flat gray of a Hong Kong winter that has not yet decided whether to become something else. There were 2 desks, a telephone on each, a wall of clipboards holding call sheets and location notes, and the ongoing revisions that a production of this complexity generated daily. The harbor smell came through the window even when it was closed. Salt and diesel. The low, persistent note of a working port that never entirely stopped. Raymond Chow had been at his desk since 6:15. He was the co-founder of Golden Harvest, the man who had broken from the Shaw Brothers system to build something independent, and who had spent the past 2 years watching what he had bet on, Bruce Lee, become something he had not quite been able to fully anticipate even when he believed in it most completely. The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, Way of the Dragon. The numbers from those 3 films had changed the conversation in Hong Kong cinema and had, eventually, changed the conversation in Los Angeles in the only language Los Angeles understood without translation. Enter the Dragon was the result of that conversation. Warner Brothers cameras in his studios, an American co-production, the bridge that Bruce Lee had been trying to build from the American side for 7 years. Finally being built from the Hong Kong side in 7 weeks. The shoot was in its 9th week. It was, by every operational measure, going well. The phone on his desk rang at 6:58. He picked it up. He listened for approximately 90 seconds. Then he set it down and sat very still for a moment, looking at the call sheet on the desk in front of him as though it contained information relevant to what he had just heard. It did not. The call had been from Los Angeles, from someone at Warner Brothers whose name is not captured in the account that eventually reached the people documenting this period, and whose specific role in the production was senior enough that when they said something had fallen through, the something was real. The project they had been quietly developing in the margins of the Enter the Dragon production, the one that had seemed, for several months, like the next logical step. The one that would have put Bruce Lee in a room on camera with the most famous athlete on the planet, was not going to happen. Muhammad Ali had declined. The reason given on the phone from Los Angeles that morning was scheduling. Raymond Chow would later tell people who asked that he had never fully believed the scheduling explanation. Let me go back, because the phone call on March 3rd is not where this story starts. This story starts several months earlier, and it starts not with a refusal, but with an idea. The specific and genuinely extraordinary idea that someone in the American entertainment industry had decided was commercially viable enough to pursue. The idea was this: Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee on screen together. Not a fight. Not in the literal sense. A film. A concept that was never fully specified in the accounts I've been able to find, and I want to be honest about that ambiguity, because the project existed more as a developing possibility than a finalized production plan. What the people involved agreed on was the premise: 2 men who represented, in their respective fields, something that had never quite been seen before. Ali in boxing, Lee in martial arts. Both of them operating at a level that required observers to find new language because the existing vocabulary was inadequate. Both of them, by 1972 and into 1973, recognized globally in a way that neither Hollywood nor the martial arts world had predicted, and neither had fully built the infrastructure to accommodate. The producer who had been shepherding the concept, whose identity the accounts I found are not consistent about, and I will not invent a name to fill the gap, had gotten far enough with it that the project had generated paperwork, preliminary agreements, a timeline, the kind of documentation that in the film industry means a thing has moved from conversation to development. And then, Sometime in the first months of 1973, Ali had said no. Here is where I need to be careful, and I want to be transparent with you about why. The accounts of this period, the period of Enter the Dragon's production, January through March 1973, are relatively well documented compared to some earlier moments in Bruce Lee's career. The production was significant enough that multiple people kept records, gave interviews, wrote memoirs. But the project involving Ali exists in those accounts as something peripheral, mentioned by multiple sources but never fully centered, never described with the kind of specific detail that would let me reconstruct it with confidence. What I can tell you with reasonable certainty, there was a concept, it was being developed. Ali's involvement was either confirmed or very seriously discussed, and at some point in late 1972 or early 1973, possibly both, the timing is not clean in the accounts, the concept stopped moving forward. What I cannot tell you with certainty is the precise sequence of decisions, who made them, and what the conversations that surrounded them actually contained. The scheduling explanation is the one that reached the record. Several people close to Bruce Lee in this period, and several people connected to the production, indicated privately that they did not believe scheduling was the actual reason. What they believed instead is where the accounts diverge, and I am going to tell you what they said while being clear that I cannot verify it. Muhammad Ali in 1973 was 31 years old. He had returned from the suspension that had cost him 3.5 years of his prime, the refusal to be inducted into the army, the stripping of his heavyweight title, the years of exile from the sport he had defined. He had fought Frazier in 1971, the fight of the century at Madison Square Garden, and lost. He had fought Frazier again in January of 1974, and won. He was building toward the Rumble in the Jungle. He was, in terms of global profile, arguably the most recognized human being on the planet. The question of whether Ali would share a screen with another performer, and specifically with a performer whose field of expertise overlapped with but did not duplicate his own, was not a simple question. Not commercially, not personally. Ali was a man of very precise self-understanding. He had spent years constructing a public identity that was as carefully considered as any of his fighting strategy. The relationship between that identity and the question of how he would appear on screen alongside someone whose physical capabilities existed in the same general register as his own, the question of who would appear to be better, stronger, faster, more dangerous, that was not a neutral question. The people close to Bruce Lee in this period who expressed skepticism about the scheduling explanation believed, with varying degrees of confidence, that the refusal had something to do with this, that Ali, or people around Ali, which in this context is often the same thing, had looked at what a shared screen with Bruce Lee would mean for the specific question of comparative physical authority, and had made a calculation. I want to be honest about what I make of this reading. When I first encountered it, my instinct was that it was too neat, too convenient a narrative for people who wanted to frame the refusal as a compliment to Bruce Lee rather than a neutral production decision. The more time I spent with it, the less certain I became in either direction. Ali was not a man who made decisions carelessly or without strategic awareness of their implications. The idea that the question of how two specific physical forces would read against each other on screen was not part of the calculation. That seems to me harder to believe than the alternative. But I cannot verify it. The scheduling explanation is the one on record. What I believe and what I can document are two different things, and I owe you that distinction. The Enter the Dragon shoot was running simultaneously with all of this. January through March of 1973, Golden Harvest Studios in Kowloon, the multiple sound stages running in the concrete block buildings, the harbor smell coming in through any exterior door, the Cantonese and English moving between each other mid-sentence in the way that bilingual production environments develop. the film lighting generating its own heat above whatever ambient temperature Kowloon contributed in the Hong Kong winter. American producers from Warner Brothers in the same rooms as Hong Kong crew who had been working with Bruce Lee since 1971. The specific friction and the specific possibility of a Hollywood-Hong Kong co-production happening simultaneously in real time. Bruce Lee was 32 years old. He was 5 feet 7 inches. He was 135 pounds. By this point in his career, the question of what he was physically capable of had been answered on screen in 3 films and in enough private training environments that the people who had witnessed it carried the answer as a specific kind of knowledge. Not theoretical, not reputation-based, but the knowledge of someone who has stood in the same room with a thing and registered it in their body as well as their mind. The question of what would happen if he and Ali were in the same room, not on screen, in the same room, with the cameras rolling, with the specific and unscripted reality of 2 people at the absolute apex of their respective physical disciplines, encountering each other in the way that such encounters, when they happen, have their own logic. That question was genuinely interesting to the people who had worked with both of them. Raymond Chow was one of those people, not because he knew Ali directly, but because he had spent 2 years knowing Bruce Lee in the specific and unusually intimate way that producers know the people whose careers they are responsible for, and he understood something about what Bruce Lee represented physically that the people making decisions in Los Angeles had not yet fully incorporated into their calculations. He had thought the project could work. When the phone call came, he sat at his desk for a while looking at a call sheet that did not contain what he was actually thinking about. The accounts of how Bruce Lee received the news are not detailed. The people who were present in the days immediately following the call describe him as having heard it without visible reaction, processing it in the way he processed most things that the external world produced for him, internally, without announcement, continuing to work. The Enter the Dragon shoot was demanding enough that the space for processing anything outside its immediate requirements was limited. He was performing in the film and was involved in enough of its creative decisions that each day on set was fully inhabited by what the day required. What the people close to him in this period have said, in the interviews and memoirs that eventually reached the documentary record, is that he did not appear to dwell on the Ali situation in any way that was visible to those around him. Whether the interior experience was different from the exterior presentation is something I genuinely cannot tell you. The people who knew him best have consistently described a man whose interior and exterior were not always the same country, and who had developed, over years of professional disappointment and professional recalibration, a capacity for holding things privately that the people closest to him respected and could not always read. There are 2 ways to understand the refusal, and I've been sitting with both of them for long enough that I want to share them honestly rather than settling for the cleaner one. The first, Ali's people made a rational commercial and strategic decision based on scheduling, competitive dynamics, or some combination of factors that had nothing specific to do with Bruce Lee as an individual. Projects fall through. Development stops. This is a story about a thing that didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen is the ordinary reason that many things in the film industry don't happen. The second, something about the specific proposition of Bruce Lee and Ali sharing a screen created a calculation problem that didn't resolve neatly. That the idea of 2 people who each represented something genuinely unprecedented in their fields being in the same visual frame, and the question of how that frame would read, what it would imply, who would emerge from it with their authority more or less intact, was complicated enough that someone made a decision based on that complexity rather than on scheduling. I want to know which one lands for you, because I've been going back and forth on this for longer than I expected, and the people I've talked to about it have consistently divided along lines I can't predict. Leave it in the comments. This is one where I genuinely want to hear the range of responses, not because I think there's a right answer, but because I think the range of answers tells you something. Enter the Dragon wrapped in March of 1973. The production had been, by any measure, something new, not just in the mechanics of a Hollywood-Hong Kong co-production, but in what it demonstrated about the specific kind of possibility that exists when the right elements arrive at the right moment. The Aberdeen fishing village area, where some of the location shooting had taken place, the salt smell stronger there than anywhere near the studios, the working boats in the harbor, the specific texture of a location that was not built for film but absorbed the cameras with the calm of a place that has been doing its own work for a long time. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. Enter the Dragon was released on August 19th, 1973. He did not see it. The Ali Project, whatever form it had taken, whatever it had been on its way to becoming, died with him. Not because the idea couldn't have been executed after his death, but because the idea without him was a different idea. The specific proposition that had made it interesting, two people at the absolute apex of their physical disciplines, in the same visual space, at the same time, required both people to be present and at that apex simultaneously. After July 20th, 1973, one of those people was gone. I want to end somewhere that the simple version of this story does not go. The simple version is, Ali refused. Bruce Lee never got the chance to prove what he could do against the greatest, and the refusal was a kind of compliment paid in the language of avoidance. That version is satisfying in a specific and somewhat cheap way. It turns a business decision, or whatever the decision actually was, into a verdict about comparative physical greatness, which is a thing that no producer's phone call and no declined development deal can actually deliver. What I think the story is actually about is something else. Bruce Lee spent his entire professional life in contact with systems that evaluated him by criteria that were inadequate to what he was. Casting offices that wrote 2 words on files, networks that said their audiences were not ready, a development deal that gave his concept to a different face, a phone call from Los Angeles explaining that the project was not going to move forward for reasons that nobody in the room quite believed. What the man who had practiced not 10,000 different things, but the same things over and over until the things were indistinguishable from him. What that man understood about refusals is something you can read in the notebooks from the back injury period, in the philosophical writing that the enforced stillness of 1970 produced. He understood that the value of what you are building does not reside in whether any particular system or person acknowledges it, that the work is the work, that the practice continues regardless of what the phone from Los Angeles says. He could not have filmed with Ali. The Ali Project did not happen, and after July 20th, 1973, it could not happen. What he did instead, the 3 films before Enter the Dragon, the Enter the Dragon itself, the footage that still exists from all of it, that exists completely and on its own terms, without anyone's permission, without anyone's acknowledgement, without needing the comparison that the project with Ali would have staged for the cameras. The comparison happens anyway. In the minds of anyone who watches what he made, the comparison happens. Ali refused to be in the same frame. The frame that contains what Bruce Lee built is wide enough that the question resolves itself, in the end, without needing anyone else in it. He was 32 years old when he died. He had made 4 films in 3 years. The films are still there. Whatever Ali's people calculated that morning when they made the call to Los Angeles, whatever they decided was at stake, whatever problem they were solving, the answer they arrived at was scheduling. History has been, in its quiet and unhurried way, working on a different answer ever since.